Hello, student of class 7. How are you all? Welcome to online classes from LPM Public School, Gola Bazar, Gorakhpur. Student, I am a science teacher, DPS sir. As you know, student, chapter 11, that is reproduction plant, is already under process, in which I have explained student about the all sexual mode of reproduction, in which there is no any requirement of any sexual gamete of plant. It could be reproduced by its different body part by the means of budding, spore formation, fragmentation, or by the help of its root, stem, or leaves. These all student I have already explained. So let's start student about the sexual reproduction. Dear student, sexual reproduction, as just I have already explained, is a such type of reproduction in which there is a requirement of both the male and female gamete. When the male and female gamete unite together, that takes the fertilization and that starts the reproduction of a new plant. So in that, the student, let's see about the female reproductive part. By the side picture you can see here this whole female reproductive part name is pistil, or you can also say carpel. Pistil, or you can also say carpel. So you can see here pistil, and it's also named as carpel, which is you can see here given here pistil or carpel. So it is present at the center part of the flower. Student, this female part is present at the center part of the flower. So this at center part, the female reproductive part is present, that is the stigma, style, and ovary. And inside the ovary, ovule is present. Okay, student. So the female reproductive part, the centermost part of the flower is known as the pistil, or you can say it's a carpel, is the female reproductive part of the flower. Pistil has broad tip known as the stigma. The upper part of the pistil is broad, and this is known as stigma. And the next, the middle narrower part, student, is known as the style, and the lower end basal part is called the ovary. So the centermost part of the flower, known as the pistil or carpel, is the female reproductive part of the flower. Pistil has broad tip known as the stigma. Stigma narrows down as a style, which opens into an ovary. So student, ovary lies at the base of the pistil. Ovary lies at the base of the pistil and encloses one or more ovules. Inside that contains one or more than one ovule. You can see here inside the ovary. Okay, ovule is present. Okay, so ovary lies in the base of the pistil and encloses one or more ovules, inside which lies the female egg cell, and inside the ovule lies the female egg cell known as the ovum. Okay, student, ovum is the plural form and ova is a singular form. So once again I want to repeat. You can see stigma here, style, and inside the ovary ovule is present, and inside the ovule ovum is present, that is the egg cell of the female reproductive part, that is the ovum. Ovum is the female gamete of the female egg cell. Now student, you can see the filament, this filament anther. This is the male reproductive part of the flower. You can call it stamen. Student, as I have told you, inside the flower there is a female reproductive part, then there is a male reproductive part, This is the filament, and this is the anther, and above it there is a dot 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 or small, that is called the pollen grain. Okay, student. So you can see here the male reproductive part, which is called the stamen. Anther is present at the tip of that filament. This is the thin body is called the filament, and above the filament there is a presence of pollen grain. So the puffy top of the stamen is known as anther. The anther contain pollen grain. Pollen grains are usually yellow in color. Pollen grains are usually yellow in color, student, and produce male gamete. It produces male gametes. Generally, student, pollen grains are surrounded by a tough protective coat. Generally, pollen grain are surrounded by a tough protective coat, okay, which prevent them from drying up. So this pollen grains is present in a tough covering which prevent them from being dry up. Now pollination, sorry, the now student, about the pollination. When the male sex organ, that is the pollen grain, from the anther transfers to the female sex organ, that is the ovule, inside which the ovum is present. Okay, when the pollen grains transfer from the male part to the female part, okay, this is called pollination. The process of transfer of pollen from the anther to stigma at the same flower or different flower, this is known as pollination. Depending upon the flower which is pollinated, pollination is transclassified. Now if the pollination is happening in the same flower, that under that condition we call it self pollination. But if the anther of one flower is transferred to the stigma of the another flower, there it takes place the cross pollination. Now student, what is do you mean by self pollination? Let's see that. The pollination which occurs when pollen from anther lands on the stigma of the same flower is called the self pollination. Once again, student, the pollination which occurs when pollen from anther lands on the stigma of the same flower is called self pollination. So, student, once again, self pollinations, the pollination which occurs when pollen from anther lands on the stigma of the same flower is called self pollination. And this happens in the bisexual flower, means the flower that contain in which both the male and female gametes are present. And in such flower, if the pollination is occurring within the same within the from the anther of the same flower to the stigma of the same flower, this is as because happening in the same flower, so it's called the self pollination, as it occurs in a bisexual flower. Sometimes happens to in what the anther from the male, means the pollen grain from the anther of one flower is transferred to the stigma of the other flower. So such type of transfer of pollen grain, that means such type of pollination, as because it is happening from one flower to another, this is called the cross pollination. It can take place both in unisexual as well as bisexual flowers. Now student, next come the agents of pollination. Who are the agents of pollination? By whom the pollination takes place? So, student, pollination occurs in several ways. Pollination occurs in several ways. Some natural agents such as birds, insects, animals, wind, and water help in carrying out pollination. Once again, student, pollination occurs in several ways. Okay, by the help of wind, insects, water, birds, animals. These are all the means of pollination. Okay, and these means or these are called the agents of pollination. Now, student, insects which feed on nectar of flower, the insects that feeds on the nectar of flower gets attracted to color and odor of the flower. Once again, student, insects which feed on the nectar, insects which feed on nectar of the flower gets attracted due to color and odor of the flower. So, suppose a beautiful, good colored and good flavored flower whose odor is very fine. So, by due to attraction of its color and odor, butterfly like insects come and sits on the flower, and while sitting, the pollen grain from the anther gets stuck to their thin legs, and while they again start flying, and uncertainly when they sit on the female part of the same flower either or of different flower, the anther that has stick on their leg falls on that stigma part of the female reproductive organs, and like this way insects has become the agent here of transferring the pollen grain from the one part of the flower to other or from one flower to another flower. This is the transferring agent, and if occurring the same flower then it's called the self pollination. If occurring different flower then it's called the cross pollination. Some insects pollinate flowers are, so examples of some flowers that are always pollinated by the means of pollinated by the help of flower are sunflower, marigold, jasmine, banana, and banyan. Some flowers of the plant, such as the grass, some flowers of plant like grass, maize, rice, sugarcane, bamboo, which have small petals, whose petals means the you can say पंखुड़ियाँ फूलों की जो पंखुड़ियाँ होती हैं which have small petals, and in some there is no petals at all, use wind of pollinating agents. In that cases, by the help of wind, they get the pollinated, thus do not produce nectar. The pollen grain from these plants are very light, okay, and by the slow movement of the wind, they easily arises from the anther and transfers to the female reproductive part, that is the stigma. So you can see here by the help of wind, by the help of insect, by the help of various agents, the pollen grain is transferred from anther to stigma. Now Vallisneria and Hydrilla use water for pollination. These two plants and their pollen grain is used to be transferred. The pollen grain from these plants are very light. Now, Vallisneria hydra used in water pollinations. From flowers of these plants release pollen in water, which can carried away by the water current to far away the plants. Now, student, what is fertilization? What do you mean by fertilization? Fertilization is the process of fusion of male and female gamete. When the male gamete, okay, enters inside the female gamete, that is when the pollen grain enters after entering through the stigma, style and ovary, when it enters inside the ovule and get attached with the ovule inside the ovary, this is called fertilization. As soon as the moment when the pollen grain enters inside the ovule, we can say fertilization has took place. The pollen tube enters the stigma and passes through the style and enters the ovule. The male gametes moves to the ovule with the help of pollen tube. So these male gametes, okay, that falls on the stigma moves toward the ovule through a tube known as pollen tube and combines with the female gamete present in the ovule to form the fertilizers, and like this way the egg gets fertilized, okay, and form they start the formation of zygote. Zygote develops into embryo. Further, this zygote develops into embryo, okay. An embryo is that part of seed which develops into new plant. So like this way, step by step it occurs. First of all, that took the case of matter of pollination. Then after pollinations, okay, then take the fertilization, and when the male gamete get fused with the female gamete, the fertilization takes place. The male gamete moves toward the ovule with the help of a pollen tubes and combines with the female gamete, and there start the formation of zygote, means the egg cell forms zygote. Zygote develops into an embryo, and further this zygote develops into an embryo. Embryo is that part of the seed which develops into a new plant. So student, once again, embryo is that part of seed, means when it comes in the condition of seed which is now capable of producing a new plant. This condition is called the embryo. There may be more than one pollen tubes. There may be more than one pollen tubes pushing their ways through the style to reach the egg cells. So, student, the pollen tube through which the pollen grain reaches up to the ovum, it might be not only one, it might be in some cases more than one also, through which, through the style to reach the egg cells. The one that find its way first get the chance to have its male gamete fusing with the egg cells. So, the first priority means वो पहला पोलन ग्रेन जो जिसको मौका मिला प्रथम बार उस एग सेल के अंदर टच करने का या प्रवेश करने का, वही उस एग को फर्टिलाइज कर पाएगा। बाकी के जो सेल्स होंगे, बाकी के जो होंगे पोलन ट्यूब्स, वो डिस्ट्रॉय हो जाएंगे। द वन दैट फाइंड्स हिज वे, एग को जो रास्ता मिल गया, फर्स्ट गेट्स चांस, जिसको प्रथम मौका मिल गया उस मेल गैमेट को फीमेल गैमेट के अंदर प्रवेश करने के लिए विद द एग सेल्स, द अदर ड्राइज अप एंड फॉल्स, बाकी के जो पोलन ग्रेन होंगे वो सूख जाएंगे और बाहर निकल जाएंगे। विद द विंड द पोलन ग्रेन फ्रॉम एनी फ्लावर में फॉल ऑन द स्टिग्मा ऑफ एनी अदर फ्लावर। हवा के झोंके से पोलन ग्रेन फ्रॉम एनी फ्लावर, किसी फूल का पोलन ग्रेन में फॉल गिर सकता है, या तो उसी पौधे के उसी फूल के स्टिग्मा के ऊपर, बट पोलन ट्यूब विल बी फॉर्म्ड ओनली बाय ए पोलन ग्रेन्स दैट बिलोंग्स टू द सेम स्पीसीज। पोलन ट्यूब विल बी फॉर्म्ड उसी से बनता है जब पोलन ग्रेन फॉल डाउन होता है, दैट बिलोंग्स टू द सेम स्पीसीज। दिस इज़ वाई, दैट इज़ वाई वी डू नॉट सी हाफ रोज एंड हाफ जैस्मिन। यही कारण है कि हमें पूरा वो दिखता है पोलन ग्रेन जो बिलोंग टू सेम स्पीसीज, दैट इज़ वाई वी डू नॉट सी हाफ। कहना मतलब है ये, इसे कहते हैं पॉलिनेशन, मीन्स फर्टिलाइजेशन यू कैन से। जब पॉलिनेशन के थ्रू जब पोलन ट्रांसफ़र होता है, उससे सीड से मिलता है, तो वहाँ पे एक नया बेबी प्लांट जर्मिनेट होना स्टार्ट हो जाता है। एम्ब्रॉय इज़ दैट पार्ट ऑफ द सीड विच डेवलप इनटू न्यू प्लांट, और एम्ब्रॉय ही वो सीड का वो हिस्सा है जो एक नए प्लांट में कन्वर्ट होता है। देयर मे बी मोर देन वन पोलन ट्यूब्स पुशिंग दियर वेज, एक से अधिक भी पोलन ग्रेन हो सकते हैं, पोलन ट्यूब हो सकते हैं। द वंस दैट फाइंड इट्स वे फर्स्ट गेट ए चांस टू हैव द मिडिल गैमेट, और जिसको मौका मिला प्रथम बार वही बीच वाला गैमेट बन जाता है, यानी कि यू कैन से सीड बन जाता है। बाकी के जो पंखुड़ियाँ वगैरह जो हैं बाकी के अपर साइड में, वो ड्राई अप होकर वो नीचे गिर जाते हैं। With the wind, with the wind, the pollen grain of any with the wind, the pollen grain of any flower may fall on the stigma of any other flower. But the pollen tubes, which is formed only by a pollen grain that belongs to the same species, a pollen tube उसी pollen grain द्वारा ही बनाया जाता है जो कि सेम उसी species का होता है. That is why यही कारण है we do not see half rows. Okay, student. So, dear student, today I am stopping up to here. Let's start in the next my video period about the formation of seeds and fruit. Till then, student, thank you. Have a nice day, student.